Okay, so once you got into the 19th century, there wasn't just a middle class anymore. It broke into three smaller subcategories, those being the upper, solid, and lower middle class. Now, the upper middle class consisted of very wealthy people with noble lifestyles, and often each of them had several houses. The solid middle class was more moderate. They were very wealthy. Well, not overly wealthy, but they were comfortable and often consisted of business professionals. The lower class was not nearly as wealthy as the upper solid classes. They were white collar workers or small traders. The family that would be seen to the right would probably fall somewhere between the solid and upper classes. Okay, so the aristocracy was just a group of wealthy elites who often married into the upper middle class, and they were made up mostly of bankers, industrialists, merchants, and plutocrats. And a plutocrat is an aristocrat who invested in industry and gained a lot of wealth from that. A lot of controversy behind the aristocracy emerged from the Corn Laws. And the Corn Laws were laws passed where high taxes were placed on grains such as corn, and these were protested and eventually abolished by incidents such as the Battle of Peterloo, in which protesters fought against the taxes, and this was named the Battle of Peterloo because it was meant to almost poke fun at or reference the Battle of Waterloo, in which England, where all of this is happening, by the way, is defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. Okay, so in the 19th century, the lives of women varied greatly depending on which class they were in. For one thing, prostitution was very abundant at this time and was very popular among occupations for women. In the lower class, they generally turned to outside work such as prostitution or working in textile mills, as you can see in this picture here. Generally, the middle class did not work in prostitution or factory jobs. They stayed at the house and often fought to expand their rights. And the upper middle class altogether did not do much other than stay home and care for the children. Much like the lives of women, the lives of children also varied greatly, being based on which social class they were in. The lower middle class children would work in factories to help bring in an income for their family. So by doing this, they were really much less dependent on their parents than other classes. On the other hand, the lives of children in the middle and upper classes were much more dependent on their parents and much, much, much less likely to work in factory jobs. Okay, so there were very significant changes in the area of marriage and family in the 19th century as opposed to centuries before this. One of which being people married for love now rather than marrying into a family where either they were in the same social class or they would gain money from marrying this family. No, that all that's gone. People now married for love. And an older husband would now marry a young wife because he would have more years under his belt and more money because of this, and he would be able to supply for a family much easier now than before. And another major change in this era would be that people had many less children. than before, and they were loved much more because they no longer had to be around for farming, or they only needed, well, they didn't really need children, but they had less and they just had them to love them. And people also started to believe that childhood was vital and that you should enjoy your childhood. Another complex situation in the 19th century was housing, and here you can see a typical 19th century apartment complex. A big part of the housing situation also came to be known as the cult of domesticity, which was women would pamper their husbands and tried to create a nice shelter of a house. And this was kind of the Victorian age in England. Another significant change in housing in the 19th century was that middle class women now had great power in their home. They handled many household decisions as well as financial decisions, so they controlled a lot of the family's money. A final considerable change in the 19th century was the way that people spent their free time, what they did for leisure. And among these were consumption of alcohol, which social drinking became a big leisurely activity at this time. And even women would take part in social drinking with the men of the house. And people also went to music halls, to theaters, and people began to gamble and play soccer. But gambling was a very big deal at this time. Here to the right, you can see a group of men gambling and drinking. And the reason gambling became such an important part of the 19th century was it increased literacy rates at this time and also began to get people more interested in becoming literate. And here's the final credits page. I hope you enjoyed my presentation on mass society.